No, I'm pretty late on this video. I've actually wanted to make this for maybe over a year now because Django Unchained has always gotten some pretty unfair and harsh criticism just because of obviously how controversial it is. And I say unfair and harsh because people don't even realize what this movie set out to do, what Quentin Tarantino's purpose was for the film and why he made it the way he made it. And for a movie that did a great job in modernizing the spaghetti western and combining it with the slavery genre to make a hero's journey. I don't think people understand how hard of a task that is, especially when he wrote and directed the movie. But it's a good thing that it didn't alter the success of the movie because ultimately it reached audiences that never would have saw this because of how the movie represented itself. When I began writing the script for this video, I actually stumbled across an article that actually started downloading automatically as soon as I clicked it, which was actually pretty annoying. But as I began reading it, I realized that it already did all the work for me. It already put all the criticisms for this movie and put them in one place in that article. And even better, it went a step further and was defending against those criticisms. All the same criticisms that I was going to defend against, except it did it with words and explained it in a way way better than I could have ever done it. So in this video, we're going to go over all of the unfair and sometimes a little bit fair criticisms of the Django Unchained movie from that article and explain why they're wrong. So the name of the article is Reviewing the Critical Conversation About Django Unchained by Daniel Brown, Mercedes Brown, and Alex Selvey at Ball State University. If you want to read this for yourself, I will leave a link in the description. You can check it out when you want to. So at the beginning of the article, they explain why it's a hard task to make a slavery movie in the first place. Doing so requires filmmakers to balance addressing the violence, brutality, and oppression surrounding slavery, but also keeping in mind the sensitivities of the audience, which is true, especially when doing what Tarantino wanted to do, which was modernize a slavery film. So he didn't want to do what The Color Purple and previous films have done. He wanted to make this a hero's journey slavery movie. Usually, as you'll see later in the article, you have to be very careful, be historically accurate, but he wanted to make a fun adventure action movie about slavery while still maintaining that respect. Which brings us to the first criticism, which is unfortunately pretty stupid. Critics were upset that he was a white guy that created this film. I'll just read it to you. Critics have focused considerably on the fact that Tarantino is white. Numerous critics have claimed that the film would have been more accurate had a black director created it. The thing that they don't understand is that this is a fictional story. It didn't have to be completely historically accurate. And what a white man creating the movie has to do with anything blows my mind, because it doesn't matter. Anybody can go and read the history on slavery. Anybody can learn about the entire years of slavery. As long as you've done the research, I don't see why that would be able to stop anyone from making a movie about slavery. Why does some critics focus on specifically having a black person make the film? But you also have to take into consideration who else is going to get this budget that Quentin Tarantino would get. Him alone. Like, not many people are going to get the type of budget he's going to get. The article then goes on to say, in addition, people like prominent filmmaker Spike Lee have repeatedly criticized the film for its portrayal of slavery, calling it irresponsible and disrespectful. Now, I'll go into why he thinks it's disrespectful a little bit later on when we get to those points. Django Unchained also makes bold choices in its portrayal of race. In many ways, the film critiques white characters with the portrayal of slave owners as incredibly stupid or relentlessly cruel. Many white characters act unintelligently in the film, and others are simply blinded by their racism. And yeah, I believe this is where Tarantino wanted to insert the comedic relief. And the thing is, I think these critics are so disconnected because who are they watching these movies with? Everybody I saw the movie with thought these scenes were hilarious. When there were the white slave owners or Ku Klux Klan acting stupid, everybody thought it was funny. In a second, you'll read why, in their defense, they somehow weren't as stupid. But for the film, where do you insert comedic relief? The best possible place for that is the stupid Ku Klux Klan and white slave owners. It was hilarious. I think it was executed perfectly. Everybody that watches these scenes were busting out laughing. I can just imagine the critics sitting there with a frown on their face, like just upset that, wow, this is so disrespectful. What? The slave owners were so much smarter than this. Why aren't they showing them in a good light? Why aren't they focusing on how they were actually kind of smart, but stupid at the same time. So then the article brings up the Ku Klux Klan scene where they were acting really stupid, and it was really funny. The scene focuses on how their attempt comedically falls apart. This is one of the main instances of comedy in the film, for the Klan members spend most of their time arguing about masks and how the eye holes were not cut well enough for them to see. Some have argued that this comedic portrayal comes at a cost, making slave owners look like a punchline and ignoring the violence of their actions. In Ebony's article, The Price of Django, writer Blair Kelly says the men and women who owned slaves were not bizarre cartoon villains or the bumbling proto-Klansmen depicted in Django Unchained. They were educated, they attended churches, and they used their education and religion to try to justify the horror that the majority of their wealth was not in land or livestock, but their ownership of human beings. According to Kelly, this portrayal of some of these white characters diminishes their cruel role into nearly insignificant comedic caricatures. The film devalues their intelligence and manipulation instead of portraying stupidity as the cause of their cruelty. It's almost as if she didn't watch the movie. The movie directly shows how their stupidity caused them to say the things that they did and do the things that they did. Even later on in the film, Calvin Candy shows that they all tried to have this ideology to explain their reasonings for doing it. They might not have had the time to show them going to churches and doing all the others. That takes away from the adventure in front of the movie. The movie had such a good pace. It couldn't spend time giving much background to these side characters. They were there for comedic relief. Once again, Quentin Tarantino wasn't trying to give a history lesson here. He was trying to make an entertaining slavery movie that is still satisfying and respectful. Now, the next criticism is about Mandingo fighting, because most scholars believe that Mandingo fighting did not historically exist in American slavery. I honestly thought this was a great scene, and it went to show the cruelty of Calvin Candy, painting him as a really cruel villain that does not care about the well-being of his slaves at all, and it's showing how he just uses them for entertainment, ultimately to profit. This is such a nitpick that so many people had, like, why does it matter if Mandingo fighting was a real thing or not? It's definitely believable. It's definitely something that probably could have happened in history. It's not too far-fetched from the other stuff they were doing to black people. Now, this was definitely the biggest controversy of the movie when it comes to the N-word. Personally, it didn't bother me, and it didn't bother anybody else I knew. I don't understand why people, I guess it's a good thing white people is more bothered by saying the N-word than black people. Well, at least the hard R. In a film, it shouldn't really, I feel like it shouldn't bother you because it's in the setting of the time and they're trying to tell a story. And now, I don't know if they actually said the N-word as much as this back then, but it's a lot like the Mandingo fighting. It's definitely a possibility, but I can still somewhat understand the uncomfortability for a white person to see this movie, and it makes them uncomfortable about them hearing the N-word that much because they feel like it shouldn't be being said at all. And I'm going to have a pretty different take here on Quentin Tarantino's movie because I came from a black family where we watched a lot of slave movies, and at a point when you watch so many of them, they start to make you like, when you finish that movie, it makes you want, you talk about inciting violence, it makes you want to hurt white people. I've seen so many sad movies about black people in slavery, not even in slavery days, just police brutality and everything. As a black person, other black people might relate. It makes you actually angry inside. It makes you want to go, like, not saying it doesn't make white people angry too, because there are white people that care about this situation and these topics. I'll say it was a relief to get a movie where there's just this hilarious action-packed adventure movie where it's about somebody getting revenge and getting his girl back. It's a hero's journey about a slave. I don't think I've ever seen something like this before, and it was just a feel-good film, and I actually appreciate Quentin Tarantino for making this movie. Quentin Tarantino actually defended himself with people criticizing him about the use of the N-word. He said, "I don't think anybody is saying that we use the word more excessively than it was used in 1858 in Mississippi, and if that's not the case, then they can just shut up," which is actually hilarious because that's what I like about him. He does not care. He doesn't give a piss about what people think. He's going to make what he's going to make, whether you like it or not. And I think it's important that people aren't restricted on what they're allowed to create or words they're allowed to use, as long as it's not hate speech, especially in this movie form, because as soon as you take that away from movies, the freedom to make whatever they want and tell the story they want, we would technically be in this controlled environment where harsh topics can't really be talked about anymore. Kelly goes on to mention that slave owners often use their education and religion as a way to justify slave owning, and he wishes that topics like these would have been as heavily addressed as others in Tarantino's film. I mean, the movie is already 2 hours and 45 minutes long. What else? What else can he fit in this movie? Like, what would you want him to take out of the movie to then replace with that? And then here, I appreciate that we had people and critics that actually defended the film. In Glenda Carpio's piece, I Like the Way You Die, Boy, Fantasy's Role in Django Unchained. It's a very long title. The author explains that Django is not meant to be understood as a historically accurate work. Carpio, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, but Carpio points out that Tarantino is more concerned about movies than anything else, and that his works of fantasy should not be expected to go hand in hand with historical accuracy. So like I said earlier, we were going to get back into some people thinking that these movies should just be made by black producers. I don't know why it matters. Whoever wants to make a historically accurate or inaccurate film, I don't see why that needs to be assigned to a race, but let's hear this out. Dwayne Wickham claims that the film is more of a blaxploitation film than a spaghetti western. In this article, The Django Unchained, really about black exploitation, Wickham addresses why Django should be seen as a portrayal of blaxploitation. Quote, the lack of opportunities for black directors to produce films concerning slavery only increases the controversy surrounding Django. Look, I don't know how this works in Hollywood. Maybe black producers don't want to make any more films. Maybe people are trying to continue on with the future and not focus on slavery all the time. Maybe our people don't want to talk about that as much anymore. I know a lot of other people from me are kind of over the slavery films, even though it's good to know your history. But like I said earlier, it makes us angry, and we kind of don't want that hate in our hearts. You know, we just would rather move on, because believe it or not, watching stuff like that does affect you, especially when it's about your own race. So maybe that's what he was getting at when he made this point, but he should have dove deeper into that a little bit more, because personally, to me, I don't care who makes the film as long as it's good. And if he's making a fictional film or a non-fictional film, it doesn't matter. The movie, as long as it's good and it's not disrespectful, it doesn't matter who makes it. This is one of those very unfair criticisms. What can Quentin Tarantino do about the color of his skin when he wants to make a certain film? On to the next criticism. The article says, some labeled Django as a glorified story of wish fulfillment and revenge with clear distinctions between good and evil. However, these descriptions used to criticize Django are ones that are the hallmark of stories of heroes. Basically, the article is defending we need that good and evil balance in order to tell a story in the first place. So what is this criticism? Tons and tons of stories are based on revenge. Just because you're telling a story doesn't mean that it has to take the side of the good guy, you know? It's being told as a hero's journey. It doesn't have to follow like a moral code all the time, and it doesn't have to follow what you think a hero's journey should be. Nobody said that your protagonist has to be a completely good character. He can have his flaws. The article goes on to say, for Django Unchained to be understood, it must be seen as a hero's journey. This classic trope has existed long before the advent of cinema, let alone Django. The film has almost all the tropes associated with this motif. And this is when I really started to like this article, because he was just they were defending the points of the movie and what Quentin Tarantino wanted to achieve, saying Tarantino wants to mock its portrayal in the hugely influential D.W. Griffith movie, which treated Klansmen as heroic, the only force between the South and black savagery. Basically, it's talking about a different scene from a different movie. Instead of applauding their machismo and bravado, they are instead depicted as stupid and ignorant. Additionally, the main villain in the film, Calvin Candy, is a vicious slave owner who pits slaves against one another to fight for his amusement. Not only is he depicted as cruel, but there is a strong implication of incestuous nature in his relationship to his sister. Once again, the villains are painted as a stark contrast to Django's altruistic nature. The elements listed previously are commonplace in the movies of heroes, but are new to films depicting slavery. In telling the story of the hero, not only is Django unchained, but so is the display of violence. The film graphically depicts scenes of whipping, slaves being eaten by dogs, slaves fighting to death, and explosive gunshot wounds. Some have claimed that these depictions of violence cheapen the reality of slavery, and that Tarantino is capitalizing on the harsh lives of slaves to make an action movie. Others have claimed that the use of comedy in the story is an insult to slaves and those who have ancestors who were enslaved. You know, sometimes I feel like white people want to be offended on behalf of black people. Like, I don't know anybody that felt this way about this film. Where are you getting this from? Every single black person that saw this movie enjoyed this movie and said, man, Django was sweet. We loved his character. We loved what he did. And the execution was perfect. The comedy actually lightens the mood from some very like hard to watch scenes in this movie. You can go from laughing out loud to the uncomfortable, like, oh man. In my personal opinion, I just see this as good writing. And another good point this article makes is right here. However, the use of comedy, action, and blood all serve a larger purpose. Django Unchained doesn't fit into the existing genre of films depicting slavery. And that's what I appreciate. That's what I was so happy to see that this article said. By extension, it reaches audiences that would otherwise not be reached by films such as 12 Years a Slave. According to Bob Seska, Tarantino has duped a lot of moviegoers into seeing this film about the monstrous, cancerous, true nature of American slavery, and I'd wager that a considerable number of people who saw Django Unchained probably didn't see Spielberg's Amistad or The Color of Purple. Actually, I haven't seen that one. I'm not even sure if I pronounced that right. Or any other historical dramas about slavery, many of which were sanitized for mass appeal. Instead of sanitizing the movie to reach a larger audience, Tarantino took the risk of making a film that pushes the envelope and reaches audiences that would typically find themselves in a theater for a movie about slavery. As Seska said, even if Tarantino exaggerated the horror of the slavery, and even if it were only half as awful as he portrayed it, shame on the United States and shame on the farmers for not eradicating it from the very start when they had the chance. Maintaining the institution only pandered to the mentally ill demographic of lazy, cheap, sadistic aristocrats who were mentally deranged serial killers hiding under the threat of secession. And they were allowed to get away with it because no one dared undermine the Southern economy. Wow, he just went off. That was that was beautiful. And he makes a great point. Even if he did exaggerate it, this is what I was saying. Those people were stupid in the first place, and America was stupid for allowing it to happen in the first place. And then on top of that, it's not completely out of question if some of these things happen or not, because they definitely could have. In an interview, Tarantino explained how he wanted to depart from the cut and dry slavery movies he had seen in order to make a film that grabbed the audience's attention. There hasn't been many slave narratives in the last, 40 years of cinema. And for the most part, most of these TV movies or special that come out are kind of what I call they're historical movies, like history with a capital H. Basically, this happened, then that happened, then this happened. And that can be fine, well enough, but for the most part, I think they keep you at arm's length dramatically because also there's this kind of level of good taste that they're trying to deal with about the history of the subject. And frankly, oftentimes they just feel like dusty textbooks, just barely dramatized. I wanted to tell the story as a genre movie, as an exciting adventure. And in these last two paragraphs, they make their point finally, like, fully on display, defending Tarantino's decisions when it came to making this movie, saying many critics see the value in his approach. As we can see in Hornaday's argument that in order to capture the perversity of a system of kidnapped human beings who were routinely bought, sold, raped, maimed, and murdered, it takes genre filmmaking at its most graphic and hyperbolic. How else can movies make proper symbolic sense of America's bloodiest, most shameful chapter? Django Unchained may not be a shining example of tastefulness in cinema, but it departs from this for a good reason. By showing imagery that is violent and grotesque, it works to accurately depict a time in American history that was also violent and grotesque. Django Unchained is certainly one of the most bold, distinct movies about American slavery that has ever been produced. A lot of the points raised against Django Unchained have some validity to them, but it is important to remember this movie was made with entirely different aims than most movies depicting slavery. The choices that Tarantino made in regards to this film were not ones any other filmmaker would have likely ever made. He didn't make historical accuracy and political correctness the primary focus on the film, claiming that it should defeat the true purpose of the movie, to tell a story and to start a dialogue. By making a movie so different than the ones before it, Tarantino crafted a film that hits audiences differently, opens new avenues of discussion, brazenly depicts the violence of American slavery, and allows for moviegoers to see a film about an empowered slave character that retakes what's rightfully his. Not every film about slavery should be like Django Unchained, and there certainly will never be another film quite like it. That outro was the cherry on top, and they couldn't have said it any better than I could have. Like I said, I'm gonna leave a description or leave a link in the description to that article that I just read. Let me know what you think about Quentin Tarantino's Django Unchained, and let me know where you disagree with me or agree with me at. Until then, I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.